Good afternoon, everyone. We're talking today about another great empiricist following John Locke and George Berkeley, and that is David Hume, a British philosopher who lived from 1711 to 1776. David Hume went further in his empiricism than either Locke or Berkeley, and in the chapter I wrote on him in my book I called David Hume the Radical Skeptic. That is, he takes, to my mind, empiricism to its logical conclusion and works his scalpel on reducing all those entities that cannot be found to be true by experience. He starts with a logic of impressions, and Locke starts with sensations. So when one of your senses or several of your senses in combination contact something in the environment, if you hit something hard, for example, you have a sensation of hardness. So the sensation is, if you will, the contact between your sense and that object that's out there in the world, producing a sensation. Hume follows that pretty closely. He just calls them impressions instead of sensations. So it's as if the outside world is making an impression upon you. But also, like Locke, the same assumption is true, that we are passive in experience. We take in the outside world, and so it is impressing itself upon my senses. I look at the light, and the brightness of the bulb impresses itself upon my senses. The ideas, according to Hume, are derived from these impressions. So the music that you're listening to now, or the taste that you're having now, is a rather vivid impression. But if you were to recall that music or taste tomorrow, it's a faded impression, he says, and you have an idea. And this is really true. I'm not looking at any green thing right now, but I can call before my mind the idea of greenness. Remember, Locke had said we have this abstraction. We can talk about greenness or thickness or any number of other things abstracted from particulars. And so, too, Hume is following closely there. Then, too, so that we can call this his logic of sensations and impressions. And now, these are great philosophers all. If you take a usual course in the history of knowledge or epistemology, you will have in your course the rationalists René Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz on that side, and then there happens to be these three great empiricists, and they are Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. And so you have 3 and 3 with each. It's a lot of threes in the history of philosophy. You have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the three greatest Greek philosophers. Others, they're great, but not as great as those three. And then in medieval philosophy, you have St. Augustine, St. Anselm, and St. Thomas Aquinas. Among the monotheists, there are other great philosophers, but those three seem to stand out. And so too here with the empiricists. So the third, David Hume, how does he differ then? Well, he thinks that all knowledge, and you'll recall, reduces to matters of fact and relations of ideas. Matters of fact are those things, those experiences I have. I can say the car is pink. I can look at the car and see that it is a car, see that it's pink, and the car is pink. Is there anything definitive about a car, anything about in the nature of a car that makes it pink? No. It just happens that this car is pink, and so it's a synthetic, what Hume calls a synthetic proposition, a matter of fact. I could say it's 70 degrees out today, or tomorrow it'll be 86. Those are matters of fact. They're verified by experience, or as the case may be, disverified or proven false by experience. But so they're matters of fact. And Hume says matters of fact are a posteriori, that is to say they're known after experience, a post, Latin phrase meaning after. Not a priori, and any matter of fact can change at any time. And so Hume, who would relax while playing billiards, this is the game they play in Europe with 3 balls instead of a whole rack of them, as is now played in America, and he would say that just because the balls move this way 700 times when I hit them such and such, doesn't mean that the 701st time will replicate that those previous 700 times. So to assume that the future will replicate the past is an unwarranted assumption. It has to be borne out by experience, and I won't know until it happens. So if the sun, as Hume says in talking about matters of fact in his great essay on human understanding, he says if I'm sorry, that was Locke, I just confused the treatise on human nature with David Hume. he says the sun will rise. Well, where do we get this notion? Because it's always risen in the past. Does that mean it'll rise tomorrow? Well, we sure hope so, but we have no proof of it. Now those things are matters of fact, all right, things that are an everyday experience. Then he contrasts that with relations of ideas. Matters of fact are known by experience. He says relations of ideas are known by the mere operation of thought. And he holds up here the highest certainties being arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. And there's something very admirable about those sciences, according to Hume. 7 times 7 equals 49. It'll be that way a million years from now. There's nothing going to change it. 3x equals 12 means that x equals 4 in algebra. And in geometry, there are these postulates and proofs that will always be. They're relations of ideas. 6 things times 6 things equals 2 things times 18 things. So you could say the relation of ideas there is between sixness, 2ness, and 18ness, but that's getting a little stretch. But they're ideas that are true as soon as you consider them. We don't need to count matchsticks to know that 6 times 6 equals 2 times 18. So these relations of ideas, as I said, are known by the mere operation of thought. The former, matters of fact, are, he says, synthetic. That is, it needs to be verified. If you tell me that your car is pink, we need some sensory experience, right, to verify that. Relations of ideas, though, are analytic. There's a series of defining traits of analytic propositions. They're known a priori, that is, prior to experience. They're tautologous, that is, true by definition. You can't deny them without committing a contradiction. So, a square has 4 sides expresses a relationship of ideas between a square and a 4-sided figure. If I say it's false that a square has 4 sides, I am trying in vain to deny that it has 4 sides. It'll be a self-contradiction to say that triangles don't have 3 sides, or they don't have 180 degrees total in their interior angles, or the squares don't have 4 sides. They will always be thus. So, matters of fact and relation of ideas are the constituents of all knowledge, according to Hume. It's very comforting, he thinks, to all of our knowledge, whether it's our geography knowledge, our spelling knowledge, our art knowledge, if you want to use that, historical knowledge, falls into one of those 2 camps. Later philosophers would call this Hume's fork, the 2 prongs to the fork. You either know things from experience or you know them by the mere operation of thought. You know them a priori. How does he apply this to metaphysical matters like the existence of God? Well, let's take a proposition. God exists, right? A simple 2-worded proposition. You have a noun and a verb. Is that a matter of fact or a relation of ideas, or neither? If it's neither, then Hume is going to say it's not knowledge. Well, let's consider the matter of fact possibility. To say that God exists as a matter of fact means that we would have to know it from experience. We'd have to have some a posteriori perception of it. See God out in the field or on Main Street or something of that sort. There is no such synthetic proposition that would verify it. There's no sensual experience that would make that true. Then, too, is it a relation of ideas? Well, one characteristic we just said is a relation of ideas is that if you have a relation of ideas, a statement about the relation of ideas is analytic, if you try to deny an analytic statement, you'll end up with a contradiction. Well, if I deny the statement God exists, put a negation sign in front of God exists, and it says it's false that God exists. Is there a self-contradiction in the statement it's false that God exists? Before you answer, is it a self-contradiction the way squares don't have 4 sides? That is a contradiction, because it's necessarily true that squares have 4 sides. You can't deny that or negate it, same thing, without committing a contradiction. But you can, Hume thought, deny the statement God exists without resulting in a self-contradiction. So, since one of the characteristics of analytic statements is that they're true by definition and known a priori, and you can't deny them without committing a contradiction, God exists cannot be such a statement. So let's review. I didn't know it from experience. I don't know it by definition, or it's not known a priori. If it's neither, then what is it? Hume says nonsense. Statements about souls and gods and spirits and angels aren't necessarily true, i.e. not analytic, and they are not empirically true, i.e. not proven by sensory reports. So they're nonsense. I always thought that Hume was attempting there, maybe not, a double entendre. Nonsense meaning it makes no sense to speak about such entities, but can't be sensed either. There's double entendre. So that's what Hume's logical scalpel does to metaphysical matters. He said in his treatise that if you take into your hands any book of divinity metaphysics, if it doesn't contain anything about matters of fact or relation of ideas, then cast it into the flames, because it contains nothing but sophistry or illusion. Those kinds of statements kept him from getting a university job. It was very scandalous to say such things about possibilities of gods and souls and afterlives, and he could never get. People were hanged during his time for saying such things. And his dialogues concerning natural religion was thought to be so scandalous it's now a classic. He reviews the arguments for God's existence, among other things, looks at the problem of evil. If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and good, why is there evil in the world? Hume examines that. It was thought to be so scandalous that it wasn't published until after his death. Dialogues concerning natural religion, a good read. Okay, so now, what would Hume say about his predecessors in this case, his empiricist predecessors? Well, you remember Locke and Berkeley both thought, Berkeley certainly believed in the existence of God. Locke also thought that there was a self. He accepted Descartes' argument, I think, therefore I am. He also thought there's material substance, although Locke defined substance as something I know not what. He couldn't give it an empirical description. According to Hume, Locke should turn in his empiricist membership card, because if you're saying that something exists, like a self, then and you're an empiricist, this is contradictory. You must have an impression of the thing. So Hume says, when I introspect, I find there no idea of a self or a selfhood. What I find is a kind of, the mind is like a theater where ideas come and go. He also uses the metaphor of a bundle of perceptions, perceptions of heat or cold or love or some kind of passion, but no mind that I see there. So the notion that that there is a self or an I, as Descartes had said, I think, therefore I am, or what Locke had said, that there's a substance that lay beneath. Substance means standing under, if you look at the word literally. That there's something standing beneath the delicious apple. Let's say a delicious apple has these traits of being red and crunchy and juicy, and underneath there's some material substance or matter that we cannot observe that holds all that together. But Hume says there's no impression of such thing. All you know about the apple are the sum total, if you will, of its attributes, its crunchiness, redness, and sweetness, as the case may be. Berkeley, too, is hoisted by Hume's petard here, because Berkeley wanted to reject the existence of matter, and what does he replace matter with? God. So when S.A.S. Percipi, when God is not observed, when since matter is rejected, and Locke's primary substances are rejected by Berkeley, what does he replace with? God. So to be is to be perceived, and the only things doing the perceiving are human minds and divine minds, a God's mind. That's what keeps the universe going. So when we're not observing the universe directly, God is observing it and keeping the systems in place. Hume accepts no such thing. He thinks universal causality keeps the universe in place. So Hume goes much further than his empiricist predecessors. He doesn't accept the kinds of things that Descartes and even Plato, as rationalists, would accept. To show how far he goes, he applies this same idea to causality. Now, causality, we think we understand what that is, right? We have object A hitting object B, and they both bounce away. If they bump cars, one hits the other, and one bounces off forward, or maybe the other bounces backward. Hume says that there's an event A, this car hitting the other, and that the car, let's call event A, this car driving. Event B is when they collide, and event C is they bounce off. That coupling of events, which Hume calls constant conjunction of events, is all we know about that alleged causal relationship. If we call it a causal relationship as if it's going to remain that way, no matter how many times we duplicate the experiment, then we are contributing something. He says that's a habit of association. We've come to expect that 3 billiard balls, now moving from the bumper cars to the billiard balls here, we've come to expect that when I hit the white ball into the red ball, bounce 3 cushions and then hit the other red ball, that's a billiard. That just because I've done it 388 times, that when I do it again that way, it'll have the same result. That habit of association is in us, he says. It's like the expectation that the sun will rise tomorrow. We don't know this to be sure. So causality is not an extra relationship in the world. We just have this constant conjunction of events, he says. And causality we contribute because we have a habit, a predisposition, if you will, to expect that the future will resemble the past, but we don't know that it will. Some of us have thought of billiards as a game of physics and with exact physical relationships that are not going to change. But Hume says, no, they could conceivably change in the future. So even causality he's skeptical about. That's repeated experience. When we peruse the arguments for God's existence, we'll see that he is skeptical of every one of them, but he's not an atheist. This is where people conflate two things and where people can probably get into trouble. Hume is an agnostic. An agnostic is composed of a Greek prefix a, meaning no, and gnosis, G-N-O-S-I-S, like the Gnostic Gospels. Combine the two and you have no knowledge. Hume is not saying God definitely doesn't exist. That would be atheism. He's saying we cannot know. All the arguments that have been put out that are purported to prove the existence of God, Hume says, have failed. But he keeps an open mind. Maybe the next one will work. But till now, they don't. So he's skeptical of any kind of metaphysical relationship, and so there's no point at which he's going to assert the existence of some unobserved entity, as they say, like a soul or an angel or a God or a spirit. And so he's pure in that respect. He is the radical skeptic that I labeled him. There's something, he has taken this idea of empiricism, the Greek word meaning experience, he's taken it to its logical conclusion like no one else. Most people who have been a while studying the history of philosophy have written articles and books. When I interview them, I like to ask who their top 5 philosophers are. And Hume usually lands in the top 5. He's in my top 5 as well. It's just that great. And one of the ways you judge philosophers is the length of the shadow that they cast. Bertrand Russell, arguably the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, in his essay on induction that he wrote in the early 1900s, it shows that he's almost a direct disciple of Hume on this matter of we can't expect that the future will replicate the past, and so Hume's shadow is cast for a long time, and that also affects the logical positivists and A.J. Ayer in the 1920s. So Hume is very influential in empiricism. Kant also comes into play here. Kant 1724 to 1804. We'll have more to say about Mr. Kant when we get to ethics. But this German philosopher from Königsberg, really, his major work, Critique of Pure Reason, he took kind of 11 years off from life to work this out. And he always had Hume in mind. And so he's born just after Hume. And they always knew of each other's work, it seemed. And he says, Hume awakened me from my slumbers. That is, his skepticism is something that Kant thought that he had to overcome. So now you have Kant saying that he won't accept either the rationalist program or the empiricist program whole hog. By way of review, remember Descartes said, we have these innate ideas. We are born with these ideas. It's mathematics and God and logical principles like the principle of identity that underlays the wax example. The empiricists say there are no innate ideas. John Locke spends a good portion of his essay on human understanding rejecting the existence of innate ideas. So, but Kant is straddling both divides here, these two great schools of knowledge. He's saying to the empiricists, we have to have, there has to be some experience, and to the rationalists he said, well, there's not innate ideas. He can't accept this idea that children come into the world with a stock of ideas. But Kant's famous quote is quote, thoughts without contents are empty, perceptions without conceptions are blind. Understanding can perceive nothing, the senses can think nothing. Knowledge arises from their united action. So you need sensation, and you need this grid of relationships embedded in the mind, as it were, that affects all that the mind takes in, and the mind helps the mind to sort it all out. So Kant, who is often proud of an idea, calls it his Copernican revolution. He has a similar pride when talking about his categorical imperative that he sometimes refers to as the law of nature, the moral law. It's as if he's talking about gravity. But he does, in his Copernican revolution, it's a comparison that would be understood if you get a little bit about Copernicus. Copernicus had said, remember, the Polish astronomer said that the Earth is not at the center of the solar system. The sun is. And he was reluctant to publish anything on that while he was alive, but he was right, which Galileo later proved by observing the moons of Jupiter. But Kant says, I have made a similar Copernican revolution. The mind is not passive in perception, like the empiricists all thought, but the mind is active. The mind is almost working on the dough of experience the way a cookie cutter works on cookie dough. It gives it shape and sorts it out and makes it systematic and understandable. So that's his Copernican revolution, that the mind is active, not passive. It's really working things through. So there's the, you have empiricism, rationalism, and someone who's neither empiricist nor rationalist, but perhaps a bit of each. Immanuel Kant, also a great philosopher. We'll see Hume and Kant again when we get to ethics, and that's a favorite part of philosophy for me. And so I hope I've made this clear to you today with David Hume and Immanuel Kant, so I hope that it'll be understandable. So I will see you again soon. Thank you.